So there's, as I'm sure you're aware, an ongoing debate about salt intake in in
Right.
this community. What is your recommendation, and what is the specific evidence that you use to base that recommendation on?
Well, let's start with 101. So if you go to university and you understand biochemistry and study nutrition, as I have a PhD in nutrition, they're going to tell you that sodium is incredibly important for the body. Do I agree? You bet. Sodium, to me, the most important role it plays lots of roles in the electrolyte system, cell function. Again, that goes back to energy field, is the role it plays as an antiseptic in the lymphatic system. Now, the lymph glands are the major filter system that go from your head to your toe. But this is one that comes in and cleans up the nonsense that the lymph system is cleaning. So what kind of sodium? That's the only debate as far as I'm concerned. There's two kinds of minerals. Now, I know we don't learn this at school, but this is reality. There's non-organic minerals. That's called table salt. That's called ground up oyster shells. They call calcium. That's most of the minerals you buy in health stores that are not usable, not digestible, and may actually create hardship by clogging capillaries and arteries. So that non-organic sodium we call sodium chloride. And let's emphasize this. There's a lot of salesmen out there who are not science-minded. They're going to tell you, well, sea salt is not sodium chloride. Wrong, it's sodium chloride. Is crystal salt sodium chloride? Yes. Is black salt sodium chloride? Yes, it's sodium chloride. And the same reason any good doctor would tell you when you have heart problems and high blood pressure not to take sodium in any significant way is because your already small vein is going to get smaller because sodium chloride, a non-organic mineral, contracts the vein. First thing you do if you get a wound, put salt on it. Notice it's going to close the wound. You'll actually visibly see the skin closing. But well, internally, the organs do, and the veins do, the capillaries, little tiny capillaries do. So that's where blood pressure gets high, because we have a smaller vein with the thing. But do we need it? Yes. So when I invented, along with two other guys, something all of you call green drinks today, back in 1981 at Hippocrates in Boston, we made sure that one of the most important things we put in was celery juice. And celery juice has organic sodium. Out of all the commonly available and inexpensive ways you can get it, it's from celery juice, celery seed, and then beyond that, sea vegetables. But the exterior of the sea vegetable has sodium chloride on it. So you may want to wash that off. I happen to not like seaweed wet myself. I wash it off and then I dehydrate it again. So it's like chips. Now, there's a nice texture to it. Another incredible way to get organic sodium.
Great. Thank you so much. So I'm going to ask you about fruit, which I know is a favorite topic of yours. So
I'm not sure of that, but
well, it's a topic that I think we discuss in this conference quite a bit because we get so much pushed to eat more fruit by so many of the professionals that are presenting here. So I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about fruit. So fructose in fruit is both criticized and defended. What is your stance, and what is the scientific evidence that you use to back that up?
well, let's go back to when I joined the team in 1975. Now, when you came to Hippocrates then, we were on that wagon. We were on that same train, tooting the horn. Remember, we were the founders of the alternative health field. So there weren't many voices then, and we had a very loud voice globally. And 1975 to 1980, and part of that time I spent in Europe running centers, developing centers, et cetera, for Hippocrates. We gave massive amounts, and I ate massive amounts. And back in 1980, they asked Anna Marie and I to become the directors of Hippocrates. And overnight, I didn't realize what an awesome responsibility I was taking on. I took it more lightly than it was. Here I had back then, 80% of the people coming to us seriously ill. Good news today is 50% of who comes here is not ill. They come here so they don't age prematurely. This is a longevity center, the premier longevity center. But back then, it was almost everyone was sick. And I'm watching visible cancers, visible tumors, when we gave large amounts of fruit sugar, be it through any fruit or through carrot juice or beet juice. Remember, in Europe, they get their sugar, table sugar. You wouldn't know the difference between what you get here from sugar cane and there from beet sugar. And we're watching the tumors grow. Now, this was completely contrary to what we were teaching people. And I felt a schism. And I felt dishonest. Let's be honest with you. I'm hooked on a lot of it because who's not high on sugar? I was high on sugar. And I started to look. And it took me 3 years, and sort of by happen chance, I found an agricultural scientist to explain to me over thousands of years, hundreds and thousands of years, the hybridization process to make fruits higher in sugar. Because what they noticed, which you'll notice today, is the fruits that are the highest in sweetness are the ones that sell the most. I mean, when I ate lots of fruit, I don't eat any fruit. It's not part of my diet anymore. That's what I went to. The sweetest orange, the sweetest mango, the sweetest whatever I'd go to. And why that is, we have that programmed into our DNA. Now, here's where the story becomes a little complicated. The original diet of man in great part was fruit. There's no doubt in my mind it's a perfect food. These trees, these bushes, these shrubs grow with hundreds and thousands of fruits on. They fall to the ground. You pick them up, eat them, you throw out the spit. You spit out the pit, I should say, not throw out the spit. and you literally grow another tree or plant or bush. What could be more perfect than that? Then man got involved. And we started the hybrid and hybrid and hybrid. So the three reasons today, when people come here ill, we don't give them any fruit because it's the same sugar. The evidence is clear. Your body does not distinguish the difference between glucose, dextrose, sucrose, and fructose. Maybe it processes a little slower, but dope is dope. That's it. Now, nobody's going to ever prove to me there's anything but a processing time. So if you eat an apple, it's going to take a little longer to get that dope in. But if you take white sugar, it's going to go in quickly. But I, again, pointed out, I take a beet and make it into crystallized sugar this way. So number one is an overwhelming amount of sugar. Here's a second one, which is more frightening. Back a couple of 100 years ago, nobody except the aristocracy ate processed sugar. It was a precious commodity that in great part created the slave industry. Now you're going to say, well, Brian's making stuff up. Check history. I know you didn't learn it if you went to American schools, but check history. So they couldn't get white folks to go down and cut these large grasses. That's where sugar cane comes from, because they just didn't have the endurance to do it. So they realized that the Africans, genetically stronger than we are, the original people, could do it. And so that was where the slave industry really geared itself up. And who bought that? The kings, queens, princesses, lords, etc. They would have a small amount of sugar. We now estimate that they probably consumed a kilo. For Americans, that's 2.2 pounds a year. So can you imagine? They were taking morsels. I used to eat that in a day. What do you mean, a year? And the fact is, we broke the pancreas. Somewhere along the way, industry realized if you spike food with sugar, I don't care if it's fruit sugar, I don't care if it's dextrose, sucrose, glucose, people are going to get hooked on it. So that's why when they took cocaine out of cola, because Rockefeller created the pharmaceutical industry, and he put a list of illicit drugs back in 1913, and a group of things that were approved. The illicit drugs were cocaine, but sugar was brought in. And now we know, if you read my book, Sweet Disease, I do a deep dive in this. If you're really serious about it, if you're not a flaming addict and want to reject everything I say, then please read that book. It will get into detail. I quote a study that was done out of Princeton University. And Princeton is pretty notable. They did something very wise. They went out on the streets and found street heroin and cocaine addicts. And they brought them in, gave them $100, I guess, and said, will you spend the day with us? And will you do MRIs? So they looked at magnetic resonant imageries of the brain and saw that people on cocaine actually had part of their brain light up, people on heroin another part of their brain. Then they took all of us, sugar addicts, and they saw the entire brain lights up. So 2 to 3 dozen times more addictive than cocaine and heroin are all forms of sugar. And when I gave up fruit, it wasn't easy, I'm going to tell you. It was no different than if I gave up another plant called white sugar. Remember, these are plants. These are plant foods. And just because we have different biological, botanical names for them doesn't mean you don't come up with the same condensed sugar content. So anywhere at any time, I'll argue and fight with any scientist because this is evidential science that we've clinically employed now for 40 years. And I can tell you, the people who were not getting well are getting well now, and people who are getting well significantly faster and more effectively, taking them off the sugars.
So I interviewed T. Colin Campbell earlier today, and I'll be interviewing him again tomorrow. And one of his major theses is the difference between parts of a plant, or taking, reducing something down to a vitamin or an element of that plant. For example, extracting out the oil versus eating the olive, extracting out the sugar versus eating the fruit. Are you saying there really is no difference between eating the extracted sugar versus the actual whole fruit?
Slowing the metabolic process. Now, I mentioned it within the context of my lecture today, but we didn't really ever do a metabolic research study that mattered until about 6 months ago. So we, for the first time, know what the metabolism does. It was not what I learned in school or he learned in school. Now, Dr. Campbell, I can't think of another individual I love and respect more than him. And I'm not saying that because I have to. I'm saying that because he's one of the purest people that I know. He is a straight shooter, and he's coming from a laboratory-created understanding of that, not a clinical setting employing and taking away sugars, fruit sugars from people. Now, the most of that work was done out at University of California in San Francisco by Lusking, I think is his name. And he writes about that. So it's slowing down the process of the sugar entering into the cell, but again, it will enter the cell. Will you get as much? If I took an apple and took the sugar out of it, I'll give you a wonderful story. So we had a gentleman that came here. He healed liver cancer. This goes back 20 some years ago. And I won't give you his name for obvious reasons, but he was working at Stanford at that time. And he had an opportunity. He was 100% on the green diet because he had grad students helping him, and they had MRIs there, but more importantly, they had PET scans. He took a gallon of organic apple juice he made that morning, gave his children, his young children some, brought the rest in and distilled the sugar out of it. And quietly, without the administration knowing it, they used it for 3 PET scans that day. And he said it was more relevant in the PET scan than the glucose they normally use. That says it all. So if I condense sugar, sure, it's going to be more aggressive, more assertive, and more problematic. If I have less sugar and more fiber, is it going to go slower? Yes, but it's still sugar. If I can get lots of sugar out of apples, maybe I take, I used to drink like a gallon of apple juice in one setting. Why? Because I was a flaming sugar addict. That was easy. I mean, when I found half gallons of Tropicana orange juice in the 70s, I thought I died and gone to heaven. I would drink one of those every other day. You're getting your fix. That's it. So I don't think Dr. Campbell's wrong. Dr. Campbell's saying what I'm saying. That, by the way, you're not getting as much sugar, but you are getting sugar. He would never tell you, you ask Dr. Campbell straight on, you're not getting sugar from that? Of course he's going to tell you get sugar. Your cell requires sugar. Remember, the 2 fuels for your body are sugars and fats, period. You just put too much sugar in and the wrong fat. That's our concern today.
Great, thank you. So I'm going to throw out to one of our audience members who has a question. David R., please state where you're from and ask your question.
Hi, Dr. Brian. This is David. I'm from Massachusetts, and I would like to ask, you spoke about salt and sodium chloride What are your thoughts about potassium chloride as a substitute to salt? Thank you.
Well, certainly potassium is better, but you've got to be cautious because one of the fastest growing disorders that we see in the world today is kidney disorders. And it's ironic, in great part, it's a lack of potassium from people on high acid meat diets, animal food diets. They cause it. But once the kidney doesn't function anymore, the potassium hurts it. So that would be my only caution with it. But again, I think the best thing to do is to get to more natural salts. Use the kind of things like one of the ways I broke myself 45, 50 years ago from it was I used dulse, ground up dulse, ground up kelp. Now I'm getting a whole lot of nutrition. It's helping also my glandular system, my immune system, and enough salt that it was pacifying me.
Great, thank you. So thyroid health is obviously crucial for the metabolism. What is your perspective on iodine supplementation for thyroid protection? And what are some of the symptoms that you see of people having thyroid issues, and how do you specifically treat it?
Well, I mean, this is another exploding problem. Go back maybe 35 years ago, we estimated that older women, about 20% of women generally, but mostly older, had thyroid problems. Now we estimate it's somewhere around 70%. And most are misdiagnosed. So let me say something bold, but I know I can back this, that many people had what we considered emotional breakdown, psychological disorder. It was purely a thyroid and glandular problem. And how many people ended up institutionalized over generations, I don't know, but I'm sure it was a very high amount of them. So that's the worst case scenario. Lethargia, weakness, confusion, foggy brain. This is what we hear. Lack of enthusiasm, lack of drive. This is what we see. Now, about 20% of men have this problem now. And what is the reason it's going through the ceiling? Well, obviously, bad lifestyles are at the core of it, but the use of cell phones. Remember, we stick a very abnormal frequency next to our brain and our thyroid. And that frequency throws the natural occurring rhythm off of the neurological system that interacts with the hormones within the glandular system. And this is why we have a weakening, a dramatic and insane level of weakening. So iodines, you can't just go to the health store and buy an iodine. Just like we said, potassium in a weak kidney backfires when it was probably why you have a kidney disorder. The wrong thyroid with a large molecule structure, if you have a thyroid problem, would hurt you. So this is why we use a specific form, an ionic form, electrically charged frequency form that's subatomic structures. They're very minute. They're almost the string. They're between a proton and the neutron and the string, which is quantum field. And when we've employed this here for about 20 years, we see dramatic improvements and changes in people. And sometimes you take it orally, sometimes you actually put it topically on the thyroid with a little oil and see if it sucks in. And it's actually monitoring how much you need. So you can put one on. If it sucks in, you need two. If it sucks in, you need three. And you do that for about 2 months. But then you go back in front of the mirror again. You may need two the next time, or may need four. It's really odd. Most of the time it goes down, but sometimes we've been fooled and it goes up. So thyroid problems, we do need iodine, but we need selenium. So selenium is as big an issue, and eating 2 little Brazil nuts a day doesn't cut it. You need to take ionic forms of selenium because Brazil nuts, when they've been tested, yes, they contain selenium, but not adequate amounts many can. A particular tree or part of the tree may have it and the other part may not have it. So this is why a standard is that selenium doesn't exist in our soils. 300 years in Europe, iodine 300 years here, 150 years. Unless you put selenium in the soil, if you're an organic farmer, you're not going to have it there.
When people, one of the things that people think they can get selenium from is Brazil nuts. Is that no longer true?
No, it's not adequate enough. No, do it. I eat those too, but it's not adequate. So when they've been really tested, not by health food people, but by science, they basically say they test some, they have a lot, some have none. So you may be taking a bag that you've gotten that have none for 2 months or a month and basically get little to none. How often do you need selenium? Every day. It used to be everywhere. Organic soil had in it. Closer you were to an ocean, the more iodine you had in it. In the Midwest, where we got most of the food in America for 200 years, they never had iodine and very little selenium in the food. And so this is why you see, even today, you have gout conditions, you have thyroid conditions in areas that are inland today around the world where they're not getting anything at all in the way of minerals because they're not close to the coast.
So something like gout, is that specifically, in your opinion, an iodine deficiency, or are there other
No, it's-
deficiencies that lead to it?
There's many, many others. That's just one thing. It's, I would say, more vitamin C concern. You know, and very few people lack vitamin C, but enough too that they end up with gout.